Father, you happen to be one of the priests of distinction here because everybody wants to ask you about the stock market. So we'll start with this one from Jerry. He wants to know if you have any stocks. Are you trading stocks? Just kidding. He's asking, are priests allowed to invest in the stock market and actively trade stocks?
Assuming Jerry isn't a stockbroker who's going to, hit up the whole diocese or eparchy. So there's a couple things to that. Yeah. So religious. So for example, the various religious orders, Dominicans, Franciscans, Benedictines, they'll take a vow of poverty, which means that they don't own stocks themselves, and really all of their property belongs ultimately to the community. It's kind of a voluntary, I don't want to use the word communism, but it's a voluntary common ownership that kind of mirrors the early church for the sake of being free to follow the gospel and worry about holy things instead of just worrying about, the stuff that you need to take care of and, material obligations and that sort of thing. So a religious will take a vow of poverty. So they wouldn't invest in stocks for their own sake. It's possible that a religious order would assign someone to be the caretaker and steward. And, they might choose to say, okay, we'll have this in this account and do this as a means of saving or something, but it would belong to the order. Diocesan clergy and eparchial clergy in the East, if you're part of an eparchy, very similar to a diocese. Diocesan clergy, there's an expectation of simplicity. So the canon in the West that addresses this, it says, clerics should lead a simple life and are to abstain from anything that smacks of vanity. And then a similar canon in the East, 385, that we're to be imbued with Christ's spirit of poverty and lead a simple life and be witnesses to heavenly goods before the world. To use temporal goods correctly, from goods acquired through ecclesiastical office, ministry, or function, they should first provide for suitable sustenance and obligations, and then devote and share the remainder in apostolic or charitable works. So essentially, the spirit of the law is for priests who are not religious, you have what you need, you can own private property, but don't be excessive, and you want to model the virtue of a kind of simplicity where you're not just being worldly and seeking for your own personal gain. So all that, considered, there's nothing immoral about a priest owning stocks or investing in stocks. I think the issue becomes if it's a distraction. There's a story about a priest who in the diocese here years ago, this is the 1960s, actually the priest that married my parents. He died in a fire along with a nun trying to save the Blessed Sacrament. He went in to save the Blessed Sacrament, and I think when he passed, they found that he owned a ton of money in I think it was Haloid, which became Xerox. I could be mixing up details, but this is someone who he had this, he wasn't even aware of it. He didn't care. He just sort of maybe handed it to someone and say, here, do something with this as, whatever. And similarly, there's a wonderful old priest I knew who he just took what was left over from his pay and had someone put it in Exxon or something. And then he ended up with this huge chunk of money and ended up donating that to a local school, which was doing, very good work. So examples of, it wasn't really on their mind at all that they had this sort of, you might call it nest egg or something in the background. And if they had gone and decided to buy a vacation house on the ocean or something, that would be an example of, contradicting the spirit of what the canons require. But in that case, the idea is the heart is not attached to it. So there's a similar exhortation to what any Christian would have, which is live simply and always look at material things as a means to serve God one way or another.